The Story That Wrote Itself by A. M. Melfa. Chapter 7. Eustace awoke with a shock of his mother's reedy voice ringing in his ears. As consciousness unfolded around him, he found himself down on all fours, crab-walking backwards, attempting to flee the sound that had drawn him up from the depths of dreaming. He bumped against something that felt, well, bumpy, which arrested his ungainly backward skitter. Breathing hard enough to power a small windmill, Eustace screwed up his eyes and peered around him into what appeared to be a manila void. The light was simultaneously mellow, but bright and extremely diffuse. For some reason it hurt his eyes, causing him to narrow them down to a squint while they watered uncontrollably. He maintained a frozen poise and allowed his eyes to adjust to his new, strangely flat surroundings. As focus was restored, Eustace surveyed the extent of his environment. Truth be told, there did not seem to be any actual extent to his locality at all. He reached out to be sure, and his hands came back to him empty save for ether. Yet indeed, his derriere was clearly being supported by something. So he lay his hands down, directly adjacent to his thighs, and asked the nerve endings there to solve the riddle for him. He began rubbing his palms across the surface and bent closer to examine its constituent parts. On his stomach now, smelling, Eustace was nearly certain of the identity of the substance that underpinned him. The dull ecru radiance combined with its tactile fibrosity and that lovely mellifluous scent of aged smoky vanilla informed the writer's senses that he was supported within a universe of heavy gauge paper. Eustace sat in silence upon the crosshatch filaments, wondering when he would wake up. Just as his visual acuity began to notice a slight modulation of light to shadow, the shrill cadence of Eleanor Gretchen Gray's harangue returned to itch at his eardrums. The pitch was so high it was painful, like a bad ear infection, causing Eustace to grab his skull and press forcefully inward in an attempt to squash that banshee wail. But it was no use. The volume only increased. Suddenly, Eustace found himself transported to his mother's kitchen on the day of her death. Eleanor lay on the floor as he had found her, throttled by toast. Yet something was very different about this recollection. It was possessed of a disturbing quality that made Eustace's heart palpitate. The strangest thing yet was that Eustace was peering at his mother's death scene through the stripes of sentences, words hanging suspended in the air between his eyes and the scene before him. Refocusing to bring the words in view, Eustace slowly realized that he was reading his own description of his mother's demise, utilized over the years on police, family, and friends alike, to excellent effect. It had been a truly inspired story, one Eustace had told and retold so many times that it had supplanted itself in his conjuring as the real truth in place of the actual truth. The act of reading the words extinguished their forms, and they drifted off and away into the energetic interface where words dwell. The clearing of the atmosphere brought the scene back into horrifying focus. Helpless to stop or avert it, Eustace was unable to halt the merciless replay of events of that day, now 20 years gone. He had returned home from his walk in time to hear an awful clamor from the kitchen, pots and pans clanging, and a dull, heavy whoomp, as if an object of some weight had just hit the floor. Sprinting into the kitchen, Eustace saw his mother writhing and flailing across the saltillo tile, slamming into cabinet doors and disgorging their contents across the killing field. Her white lacquered fingernails raked hard vertical welts down the front of her slender swan's neck. Eustace leapt forward to her aid. trying desperately to arrest her violent thrash. He blindly grasped at a wooden spoon from amongst the confettied mess on the floor and jammed it roughly between her teeth, trying to pry her jaws apart. Through the struggle, he ascertained that she was not choking on her tongue, but instead caught a brief glimpse of what appeared to be a wad of bread lodged at the top of her esophagus. His fingers formed a three-pronged pincer, and he was just about to round his digits into her maw when the totality of the situation hit him, purloining his motion. He fell back onto his butt and let go of his convulsing mother. Eleanor continued to scratch and claw at her throat, now locking petrified eyes with her son, her line of sight telegraphing desperate pleas for rescue. Eustace stood, taking 3 slow, measured steps back and away from his mother. His body adopted a hunched, loose-limbed attitude, eyes clouding over and mouth hanging slack, while his mother's occluded, waspish voice eked out his name, vowel by syllable. Eustace began composing the story of her unfortunate death by asphyxiation on the air vibrating between them. Bringing up his pointer finger, he dashed "the end" across the silent space with a practiced flourish. Absently, he tilted his gaze down to the sight of his mother, lying blue-faced and bug-eyed at his feet, deader than dead. The only concrete thought he could muster was that her body had taken on the shape of a comma, curled up just there on the brick-colored floor. The sight caused a laugh to spontaneously regurgitate from somewhere inside of his body, followed by the whisper words, "Comma, more like period, end of sentence." End of chapter 7.